You know, I honestly can't remember, but I know that I first became involved when an old friend from Huron the Brule approached me and said that they had this camp and that they did student recitals, not recitals, but concerts, and that our clearing next to our house here would make for a great place to put up a tent and have a group of the students perform. So I asked my mom, and she said, yes, that sounded fine. And it was really quite astonishing to me how good they were and professional, and it was a lovely event. Afterwards, we had a party that went on a lot longer than we all imagined it would, and I sort of caught the spirit then, I think. And for several years after that, they would come down in July and to have a student performance. When my daughter was married 10 years ago, she had wanted a string quartet at her wedding here at Brule, and I thought of the camp. So I called Tom George, the director, and asked whether he might be able to help me, find one, and thinking that perhaps the faculty from the camp, might be available. Well, of course, they're all booked solid. So he said, well, what I could do is have one of the student quartets from the Twin Cities come. And I said, perfect, because this was going to be a kind of homemade wedding with various people making a wedding cake and whatnot. So they arrived. It was two sisters and two fellows, and it was wonderful. They stayed here for the entire wedding. We had a major downpour in the middle of the ceremony, but my sister-in-law, Sarah, got some big umbrellas to protect them and their instruments, and afterwards they played Scott Joplin tunes up on our porch, and they just adapted so easily to the really difficult circumstances that I had a new appreciation for, I think, young people getting into something that they really enjoy. I mean, you can see it with sports where kids high-five each other after, winning, or, pat each other on the shoulder after losing a sports game. But I saw the same kind of team spirit, I guess I would say, in the quartets.
So when did you actually get involved in the board?
It would have been maybe 3 or 4 years after that. They invited me to join, and my mother was still alive at the time, and it made sense to me to have a reason to come out and see her more often. Then, of course, she died, so there I was on the board. Or I've stayed. It's been 8 years now. So, and learning more all the time. It's been a deepening experience, I would say, on all counts. When I was asked to join the board, I was put on the strategic planning committee. And I'd had the benefit of working for a foundation that focused exclusively on career development for young musicians, whether they were composers or vocalists or instrumentalists. So I knew the landscape in the United States for programs that generally took people who were at the conservatory level or just after that and tried to help them gain a kind of footing on a career path. So when I was on the committee, I said, well, have you thought about doing a graduate program? And no, they hadn't. And I also wondered whether they had thoughts about presenting some of the more advanced quartets in the Twin Cities. One of the problems for the camp is that it's on Madeline Island, and there are many people from the Twin Cities who in the summer have homes there and spend time there. But if you want to broaden the base of support, you have to go beyond Madeline Island. And as a concept, it's a nice one, but you aren't really compelled to support the camp unless you can really hear what's going on. So I had put out some ideas in the planning in the early years that I was on the board, and lo and behold, we are now doing the things that I suggested, I guess you could put it that way, back in 2006. We now have what you might call a graduate track, in that we have the more accomplished musicians receive fellowships and get an extra week of training, and then we offer 2 of those quartets artist residency activities in the Twin Cities, which gives us a presence in the Twin Cities. People who don't have houses on the island but are interested in classical music or chamber music have a chance to hear them at a variety of performances. They also get a chance to learn what it might be like to teach either in the K-12 setting or in master classes for high school students. And we're expanding on that program, very gradually. So that would be the biggest change. It's been, let's see, we launched that program in 2011, so we're in our third year of it now. And actually, I'm in my third year as board chair, so.
So where do you see the camp going as you look forward?
Oh, I see absolute unimaginable potential. I think having been acquainted with some of the programs that exist around the country, I know one thing that our focus on chamber music exclusively is unique. The facilities are wonderful in that they are all paid off. I think the only thing we probably lack is a sort of central lodge where the administrative offices could be, and there could be more of a place for the young musicians to sort of congregate and do different things. But one of the things that we're thinking about now is greater use of the facilities by us, i.e. extending the season. It'll be 5 weeks next year, which is a big growth from when it began, when it was only 1 week. And I think I see, too, being interested in the development of an artistic vision and sense of direction, that there might be a really good case made for using the facilities for retreats for pre-professional or just, beginning professional quartets to come and take on new repertoire, perhaps work with a composer, perhaps work with, a poet. Or I was reading the other day in Chamber Music America's magazine about a new ensemble that includes a writer, and they do programs that combine music and poetry in ways that are really innovative. So I see, all kinds of possibilities focusing, if you will, on the later stages of not so much training, but learning as an ensemble, self-learning, I guess I would call it, perhaps with, mentors or people who've been around for quite a long time.
What's so special about chamber music quartets that would make a group of people organize and form a special school for that purpose?
Well, I can only speak for myself in terms of organizing, a group, but I think there's something really magical about the idea of 4 people coming together to produce something. I mean, the creative process is wonderful when you're sort of working on something alone. I mean, my framework is a literary one, and so when I write, it's sort of like there's a voice that I've created that speaks back to me and whatnot. But when they're real voices, and it's not only the human voice but the voice of the instrument, I mean, the chances of building on each other in the learning becomes so much more accelerated and deeper. And I think the idea, I mean, I love to collaborate, and so the whole idea of collaboration as it's practiced in chamber music seems to me the absolute highest example of collaboration. So I don't know whether other people are kind of drawn to chamber music in the same way. I should imagine they might be, because you can hear the individual voices of the different instruments in a way that's slightly different. I mean, I love choral music, and I think of an orchestra as being more like a chorus. And I like soloists, but I like it when there's a blend. There's, right in the middle between the orchestral and the choral and the soloist, if you will.
Some have said that the composers really put their best efforts into the quartets, that they actually think of that as the highest art or musical art form. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would imagine it might be for the reasons that I was just talking about. Although when I don't know. I mean, I would imagine that when you've got the behemoth of an orchestra or a chorus, and you're thinking about all the movements would be grander in scale. So you couldn't have the nuance the emotional nuance that you can express with a quartet.
Have you learned anything about music from your involvement in this organization a little bit?
Well, I've learned about it much more as a voice, if you will, or voices. And again, it's my literary frame of reference. I don't think people think too much, unless you are an avid reader or practitioner, about voice in writing, but it's the same, it's just a different instrument. But it's the same kind of thing. It's an authority of seeking some way of expressing a feeling or a truth or an idea.
In this high-tech dog-eat-dog world, why are the humanities important, especially music?
Well, and you and I have talked about this before, but I was thinking actually about this voice thing, and I think one thing about being alive and being human and conscious is that you're aware all around you about systems, growth and dying, cycles of life type thing. And I think often of weather systems being like emotional ups and downs for human beings. And obviously we don't express ourselves in tornadoes and hurricanes and droughts and whatnot, but I think we all in some way look for some way to communicate we get it, we understand, we're part of that. And whether you're excelling at some kind of a sport and having the physical ability to communicate a beautiful soccer kick, or some kind of plie as a dancer, or whatever, you look for some way to express that. And I think if you don't have that way of expressing your life, you're not really fully, at all the windows of your soul, if I could put it that way. And I think the humanities, I know athletics provide a sort of sense of physical being and strength, and but that kind of gives out over time. And the humanities, whatever you may be interested in, whether it's pursuing a philosophical idea, some kind of logical thing or problem, or working in any one of the arts forms, it gives you a longer chance to learn a language, to learn an instrument, if we want to think of it that way. And by language, I mean it could be a foreign language, it could be the language of the specialty, and it pulls you on. You grow.
What can a student expect to gain from an experience at this camp?
Well, I think they have a much deeper learning experience about repertoire and about what composers are trying to express in the music. I know they get that. I think they learn from each other. I think the whole ways of learning, that is a very rich experience for them. What we learn from the evaluations is that the concentration and focus provides for a real accelerated time on all fronts, no matter what it is you're learning. And there's a real serenity to the island in just being in the midst of all those aspen and birch trees and the green and the blue sky and the water and everything that I think invites delving more deeply. There aren't the distractions. It's too easy to say, though, that there aren't the distractions. There's something that pushes them deeper as well. Our fire is going out. We need to stoke the fire. Can we stop long?
There must be something special about this school that has lasted 30 years, almost 30 years. What?
Well, I think the Islanders have really. It's a combination. And Tom George has been brilliant in bringing people together who have created a fabulous core curriculum. And one thing that Madeline Island does is bring in, for the 4 weeks, each week has a different resident quartet. So each of them has a unique teaching style, a story about how they, creation story about how they came together and how it is they make it work, the dynamics of how they focus on a particular repertoire, what they're interested in, and so forth. So the kids get exposure to 4 different quartets, and so do the Islanders because they present weekly concerts. So there's a very very fervent support group, if you will, for what goes on in those 4 weeks. And I think it's just kept getting better, and so that's kept people interested in it. I think for the faculty, the chance to be on Madeline, for better or worse with the mosquitoes and whatnot, generally speaking, it's a pleasant experience. So they enjoy it, and they enjoy, meeting each other, and it's just a lovely, intense experience all around for everyone, I think, and there have been rough times for sure. I mean, when the economy is bad, it's been a struggle. But I think also, if you manage to stay alive, there were an awful lot of nonprofits that were founded in the 70s and 80s, and an awful lot of them are gone. But I think if you manage to get through those hard times, we're now in a growth period, and at the point when I came on the board, it was a shift into a new generation of board members, if you will. There were some longtime supporters who were getting quite elderly, and they're gone. And I think you have to keep replenishing. And as I said in one of the planning meetings, it's grow or die. But in fact, I think that is actually an underlying truth in all of this.
All right. Well, it would be, there's something kind of, I think, magical of Madeline Island. I've been going up to Madeline Island for years.
Yeah.
We should expand a little bit on what it is that's so enchanting about the island.
Well, I think for one thing, there's something special about having to take a ferry to get over there. I mean, you leave behind something. The other thing is, I mean, you get it in Bayfield, you get that wonderful air. I mean, Lake Superior for inland people is about as close as you're going to get to an ocean kind of experience. And I think the other thing I like about Madeline is that there are little places where you interact with everybody, and then you can be completely alone. Someplace you don't hear tires whining on the highway the way you do here because their logging trucks go flying by. You don't have that kind of thing on Madeline Island. And the other thing is, you have what's on the island, and you make do with what's on the island. And if you go to the little store, and the little store only has tuna fish, you're going to be eating tuna fish. And there's something kind of nice about living within limitations that's also kind of great. I don't know, islands just fascinate me because they're islands under the sea, at one point they may have been popped up like Madeline. And Madeline being come out of the glacial age with all the other little Apostle Islands, that's also sort of fascinating, it seems to me. What it's made of, it's very hard. I've forgotten exactly what the rock is, but you can tell from looking at some of the similar Apostle Islands that when they quarried brownstone for houses in Chicago, they looked just like they came directly from the island.
Yeah, there's something you said about one artistic director to another. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I think no matter what field you're in and no matter what job it is, you get into a job and it takes a year or two to really learn it and what you can bring to it, and then you bring that, and then there's a sort of winding down. And I think there's a life cycle in terms of personnel. Now, Tom has been there for 30 years, and he has sort of reinvented himself, it seems to me, every 5 years or so. But I think it will be wonderful to have a new musical director. Our new one is considerably younger than our old one. Not that big a deal, but, and also comes from a background of being an educator instead of being an orchestral performer. And it will be interesting to see how that kind of influences the curriculum and what goes on. Well, I think Tom, I mean, you know, that the crazy saying about a tall oak is only a nut, is a nut that held its ground. He will say, you know, he was naive in the extreme in thinking, oh, we'll just go put a camp together. But I think he has been a genius in seizing every opportunity that has come along and seen it as seeing its potential for growth. And he's invited people, other people's ideas, and made the most of them. And that's a very different kind of personality than sometimes you see in a visionary founder. Somebody who had an initial idea and wants to hew to that idea.
What do you think his greatest strength has been in his capacity as executive?
Working with a board, building support. He keeps us all very, very well informed. And he knows how to talk with, to sort of create a consensus by talking individually with all of us. So we feel like we're in on the conversation. I mean, I don't mean to suggest that he talks all the time with all 20-some board members. That's not true. But there is a core group who really feel like they are engaged in a productive way. And he will say, you know, that's his work is to work with the board. And I think that's become more true over time as he's been able to delegate the day-to-day operations of the camp and the financial, you know, inning and outing. But you have to, in a nonprofit arts organization, you have to have that shadow cabinet, you know, that is out there as a group of missionaries on your behalf. And I think he's been, in inspiring great boards, I think he's done a fabulous job.
Has his role changed over 30 years?
I think it has. I mean, I think initially, and this is true of all arts nonprofits, that you have people who are friends and who are believers and they want to see if you can do what you are purporting to want to do. And I think even when I came on the board, there were still quite a few people who were kind of like that. And if they weren't direct friends, they were people on the island who loved the chance to come listen to music. And you know, it's evolved. I would say we've matured into a board that now, if something were to happen to Tom, we could keep the institution going. I think perhaps even 5, 8 years ago, that might not have been true. I think maybe it would have. We used to joke about the executive director. We needed a succession plan in case he got hit by a beer bus. I don't know what we thought a beer bus was. I guess a beer delivery truck. And we had on paper a succession plan, but I'm not so sure we had the depth of understanding about what the camp really was all about and everything, so that we could have conveyed to potential candidates, you know, what exactly was going on. So, and we're aware that at some point Tom is going to want to retire, and for a moment at least, the responsibility for the camp is going to rest with us until we can hand it off again to, an executive director. So I think he's created something that's going to last, and he really had to do that. He had to create a carrying capacity in others to make that possible.
So I think Tom's functions have changed too. He used to be the chief cook and bottle washer.
He was.
So, but as the organization's grown, you've taken on people, and he isn't doing everything anymore. He specializes in. Like he used to be the artistic director and the executive.
Right. He hired all the faculty. I believe he probably recruited the students, you know, and looked at the audition tapes and stuff. I don't think he cooked the food and fed them, but he might have. I mean, and it's funny to hear how they view him. I mean, you were saying you overheard the kids on the student council talking about, we got to have him do something about the weather. Well, they see him at a level of being able to influence, you know, they don't see him as the chief cook and bottle washer. They see him as, although I guess weather could be considered bottle washing.
90% of the job of directing students is to read what's plainly on the page. The other 10% is attempting to incite their imagination about what's behind and between the notes, what could never be written down in any score. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's absolutely true. I mean, weren't you saying that you can have a 13-minute Mahler octet or whatever it was, or you know, an 8-minute? It depends on what one's interpretation of the basic score is. I mean, it's not unlike somebody reading a poem. Which would be my frame of reference, I mean, you can emphasize lines, the punctuation, the line breaks, to suggest all different kinds of interpretations of what the poet is saying. And the melodic line and the relative, you know, quiet or volume, you know, all of those things are eloquent. And so just a change here or there would make all the difference. And I think the 10%, you know, is that thinking about the composer's intent and in the actual notes that are on the page? I'm not just sure. I don't remember well enough from that quote.
Yeah, I think that's what it was, the interpretation.
Yeah, the intent of the composer, perhaps.
And one other from that article. You know, a good teacher is a spiritual guide, but also a physics teacher. And the goal was to bridge the gap between boring detail and the mysteries of the universe.
Yes, and I think this is, again, if you look only at the pieces, the notes on the page, I mean, well, take a completely different example. Say you look at a blueberry on its stem with all those leaves, and you're thinking only that's just going to taste sweet, or, you know, I'm going to pick it, and you don't think of it as an expression, to use perhaps not the right term, of life force in that branch and that bush and that plant. It's going to be a boring detail. But if you think into the nexus of it, the genesis of that particular note or series of notes, just as you would that bush, you're into something deeper. You're into the mysteries of the universe and how one thing follows on another. What is the logic of one thing following in another? Well, you can tell when it's right or when it doesn't. That's one of those mysteries. And I think you can get at that when you're trying to interpret the way a composer has put down what seems to him or her to be a logical progression of notes to express, you know, something. A blueberry.
I don't know what this will cause you to do. There's a quote about Mozart's florid ornamentation and the art of flirtation. The presence of sex behind Mozart's ruffles has been mostly unknown to me.
Which article's that from?
It was called the one by Jeff something or other.
Oh, Jeff Dink?
Yeah,
Jeffrey
Jeff
Dink,
Dink,
the pianist.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if that's word comment.
I don't know what I'd say, actually.
Um,
He was adolescent.
Yeah. I think that pretty much covers
I think so too. I can't think of another thing.